She asked for $500, sat in a bank cubicle with a manila envelope and the only blazer she had ever borrowed. She had rehearsed this since 6 that morning. The loan officer looked at the screen, not at her. The answer was no. 3 inches of pressboard away, a man heard every word, not because he wanted to, because the wall was not built to hold anything back. He did not know her name or what the money was for, but he knew the voice. He had heard it 31 years ago, from someone he could not save. The cubicle was 6 feet by 4 feet, gray fabric walls on 3 sides. A desk that was not a desk, but a shelf bolted to a partition. A computer monitor turned at an angle that let the person behind it see the screen, but not the person sitting across from it. Monique Richardson placed the manila envelope on the desk. The way you place something valuable on a surface you do not trust. Carefully, with both hands. She did not let go of it right away. She held it for a moment, longer than necessary, the way a person holds something that contains the entire administrative record of her life and knows that what is inside it will not be enough. The envelope held her credit report, her children's birth certificates, her divorce decree, her mother's death certificate, pay stubs from 2 part-time jobs, a letter from Deshawn's school confirming enrollment. Every document she had spent the previous night organizing on the kitchen table after the children fell asleep, arranging and rearranging them in the order she thought would make her case most clearly. The loan officer was a woman named Patel, late 20s, professional, not unkind. She wore a name badge clipped to a lanyard and she smiled when Monique sat down. It was the kind of smile people are trained to give, warm on the surface, procedural underneath. She opened the envelope. She did not read the documents. She entered the Social Security number into the system and waited for the screen to populate. Credit score 503. She did not say it out loud at first. She scrolled. Monique watched her eyes move across the screen. Left to right, top to bottom. The way a person reads a story they already know the ending to. No collateral. 2 part-time employers. No savings account. Outstanding balance on a medical bill from an emergency room, visit 14 days prior, $1,200, unpaid. The loan officer looked at Monique for the first time since she had opened the file, not with cruelty, with the expression of someone who has delivered this particular message 40 times this month and has learned to do it without flinching. Monique explained what the money was for. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She had practiced this part. She had stood in front of the bathroom mirror at 5:15 that morning and said the words until they came out steady, until they sounded like facts instead of begging. She delivered them now the same way, measured, clear. The voice of a woman who understood that control was the only currency she had left in this room. The loan officer listened. She nodded once. She looked back at the screen. I am sorry. The system does not allow me to approve this. Not I cannot. The system does not allow me. The woman behind the desk was not the one saying no. The algorithm was saying no. The credit score was saying no. The number that had been assigned to Monique's financial life, by a formula that did not know her name or her children, or what the $500 was for, that number had spoken, and the woman behind the desk had simply repeated what it said. Monique did not argue. She had known this was possible. She had prepared for it the way she prepared for most things, by already carrying the weight of it before it arrived, so that when it landed it would not knock her down. She picked up the envelope. She held it against her chest. She said, "Thank you." 2 words she did not owe anyone in that room. 2 words she said anyway because her mother had taught her that how you leave a room matters more than what happened inside it. She stood up. She pushed the chair back. She walked toward the glass doors at the front of the bank. She stopped at the door for 3 seconds. She did not turn around. She did not look at anyone. She just stood there with her hand on the glass and the envelope against her ribs, and 3 seconds of silence that held everything she had not said. The practiced words that had worked. The ones behind them that she had never let out. 3 seconds. Then she pushed the door open and walked into the morning. On the other side of the partition, Eric Johnson had heard every word. He had not intended to. The cubicle dividers at Pacific Republic Bank were 3 inches of compressed wood laminated to look like something more substantial than they were. They separated conversations the way a curtain separates rooms, technically, not functionally. Sound passed through them without effort. Every syllable, every pause, every number the loan officer read from the screen. Eric was sitting across from his own loan officer, a man named Whitfield, Senior Commercial Lending. The kind of banker who stands up when you walk in and already has your paperwork printed and collated in a folder with your name on the tab. Eric had come in to sign the final documents on a $2.3 million construction credit line, a mixed-use development in the Fillmore district. 14 residential units above ground floor retail. The approval had taken 12 minutes. Not 12 days, 12 minutes. The same bank, the same morning, the same building, a different answer. He had been reading the 3rd page of the loan agreement when he heard her voice through the partition. Not the words at first. The quality, the control in it, the way every sentence had been measured before it was spoken. The way someone speaks when they have rehearsed, not because they want to impress, but because they cannot afford to fall apart. He stopped reading. Whitfield was explaining the disbursement schedule. Eric was not listening. He was listening to the woman on the other side of 3 inches of pressboard explain to a stranger why she needed $500. He heard the loan officer's keyboard. He heard the silence after the number was read. He heard the answer. He heard the thank you. He did not know yet why that voice stopped him. He would not understand for another 3 hours sitting in his car in the parking lot of a building he had not visited in 22 years. He signed the last page. He shook Whitfield's hand. He picked up his copies and walked out through the same glass doors. Monique was standing at the bus stop, 15 feet from the entrance, the manila envelope in her hand, her back straight, her eyes on the road, waiting for the 22 line. Eric saw her. He did not stop. He walked to his car. He started the engine. He drove away. Monique Richardson woke up at 4:50 that morning. She did not need an alarm. Her body had been waking her before 5 for 3 years, not from habit, from necessity. There were things that had to be done before the children opened their eyes, and the day started making demands she could not negotiate with. The apartment was a 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor of a building on Divisadero Street. The hallway smelled like cleaning solution and cooking oil. The lock on the front door required a specific sequence. Turn left, pull, turn right. She had shown Deshawn how to do it in case he ever came home and she was not there yet. He had practiced it until he could do it without thinking. He was 7. The children slept in the bedroom, both of them. Deshawn on the left side, Keisha on the right. Monique slept on the sofa in the living room, not because there was no space in the bed, because 2 children needed a bed more than 1 adult did. She had stopped thinking of this as sacrifice a long time ago. It was just the math of the household. 2 bodies that were still growing, one that had already finished. The growing ones got the mattress. She moved through the kitchen without turning on the overhead light. The refrigerator light was enough. She opened it and looked at what was there. Half a carton of eggs, 4, bread, 5 slices, 1 heel, a jar of peanut butter, with about 2 days left if she spread it thin, milk, enough for 2 glasses. She made eggs for Deshawn and Keisha, 2 each. She cut the bread into halves and spread peanut butter on 3 pieces. She poured the milk into 2 glasses and rinsed the carton and set it by the door to take to recycling on the way out. She did not make herself a plate. When Deshawn came to the table at 6:15 with his backpack already on, he looked at the counter where her plate was not. He had learned to look, 7 years old, and he had already learned to check. You eat already, Mama. I ate earlier. It was the same lie every morning. She said it the same way every time. Lightly, like it was not worth discussing, like breakfast was something she had simply handled before he woke up. He looked at her for a moment, then he sat down. He did not push it. He had learned not to push it. Deshawn chewed on the right side, only the right side. His left cheek had been swollen for 14 days, not dramatically, not enough that a stranger would notice. But Monique noticed. She noticed the way he tilted his head when he ate, the way he held the fork so it delivered food to the right side of his mouth, the way he did not complain, not once. 7 years old, and he had already learned to work around pain. At 6:20, Monique walked across the hall and knocked on apartment 4B. The door opened within seconds. Gwendolyn Price, 68 years old. She had lived in that building for 31 years. She had watched 3 generations of families move in and move out and had outlasted all of them. She babysat Deshawn and Keisha on mornings when Monique's shift started before school drop-off. She did not charge for it. She had never once discussed charging for it. Monique did not ask to borrow the blazer. She stood in the doorway and Gwendolyn looked at her and understood. She went inside and came back with a navy blazer on a hanger. It was the only blazer in the building. Gwendolyn had bought it 11 years ago for a funeral and had worn it twice since. "Where are you going?" "The bank." Gwendolyn did not ask why. She handed Monique the blazer and looked at her the way someone looks at a person who is about to do something difficult and has already decided to do it anyway. "You will do fine." 4 words. Gwendolyn said them without emphasis, without drama, the way a woman who has seen 68 years of mornings says something she means completely. Monique went back to her apartment. She closed the bathroom door. She put on the blazer. She looked at herself in the mirror. She held the manila envelope in front of her. She practiced. She said the words, what she needed, why she needed it, how she intended to pay it back. She said them quietly so the children would not hear. She said them until they stopped shaking, until they sounded like a person who had the right to ask for something, until she believed, for the length of time it took to say them, that the answer might be yes. She kissed both children. She told Deshawn to listen to Miss Gwendolyn. She told Keisha to be good. She did not tell either of them where she was going. She walked out the front door and turned left toward the bus stop on Geary. She did not tell anyone what she was about to do. Asking for help was already hard enough. Telling people you were about to ask made it harder, because then they would know if you failed. The bus came at 7:11. She got on. She sat in the third row. She held the envelope in her lap and watched the city go by through a window that needed cleaning. She did not know that in 46 minutes she would be sitting in a cubicle being told no. She did not know that the man in the next cubicle would hear everything. She did not know that by the end of this day her life would begin to change in ways she could not predict from the third row of the 22 line. She just rode the bus and held the envelope and tried not to rehearse the words again because she had already said them enough times, and saying them more would make them sound memorized instead of real. Deshawn fell on the playground at Rosa Parks Elementary on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic fall. He tripped over a raised edge of asphalt near the basketball court and hit his mouth on the metal railing of the wheelchair ramp. One tooth cracked. The left upper premolar. He came to the nurse's office with blood on his shirt and his hand over his mouth and his eyes dry because he had decided somewhere between the railing and the hallway that he was not going to cry about this. The school called Monique at her first job. She was cleaning rooms at a motel on Lombard Street. She left in the middle of a shift. Her supervisor told her she would be docked 2 hours. She said fine and walked out. The emergency room at San Francisco General admitted Deshawn at 1:45. The doctor looked at the tooth. The crack ran below the gum line. There was already swelling. The doctor prescribed amoxicillin and wrote a referral for a pediatric dentist. He did not extract the tooth. That was not what emergency rooms did. The ER stabilized. It did not solve. The bill for the visit was $1,200. Monique had Medicaid. Medicaid covered the ER visit partially. It did not cover dental. Not the kind Deshawn needed. Not the extraction. Not the follow-up. Not the antibiotics that the next doctor would prescribe when the first round did not hold. She called the first dentist on the referral list the next morning. The receptionist asked the question every receptionist asked. Do you have insurance Medicaid? Silence. The particular silence that comes after that word in a dental office. The sound of someone pulling up a screen and already knowing what it will say. Our earliest availability is 8 weeks. She called the second number. Same question. Same silence. Same answer. 10 weeks. She called the third. 12 weeks. She called the fourth. Not accepting new Medicaid patients at this time. She called the fifth. 6 weeks. She called the sixth. The line was disconnected. She called the seventh. 7 calls. Each one began the same way. Each one ended the same way. The word Medicaid entering the conversation like a door closing. The private dental clinic on Fulton Street could see Deshawn in 3 days. The extraction would take 20 minutes. The cost was $500, payable in full before the procedure. $500. She did not have $500. She did not have $200. She had $43 in her checking account and a paycheck coming on Friday that would cover rent and nothing else. She called the clinic back. She asked if they had a payment plan. They did not. She asked if they could bill Medicaid for any portion. They could not. She asked if there was a sliding scale. There was not. The receptionist was polite. She had answered these questions before. At night, Monique sat on the edge of Deshawn's bed and rubbed clove oil on his gums with her finger. The oil was $2.14 from the pharmacy on Haight Street. It numbed the area for about 40 minutes, long enough for him to fall asleep. He lay there with his mouth slightly open and his cheek still swollen and his eyes closed. He did not flinch when she touched the gum. He had stopped flinching on day 3. He had learned what the oil did, and he trusted her hand, and he let it happen without resistance. 7 years old. He had already learned to chew on one side. He had already learned to sleep with his mouth open because closing it put pressure on the tooth. He had already learned that when his mother rubbed something on his gums at night, it meant the pain would stop long enough for sleep to come. He had already learned more about pain management than most adults learn in a lifetime. She did not know that the infection had already reached the bone. She would not know for another 6 days. She only knew what she could see, the swelling that would not go down, the way he tilted his head, the way he had stopped smiling on the left side. She needed $500. That was the distance between where things were and where they needed to be. $500 that the system had looked at and decided was too much risk for a woman with a 3-digit number that someone else had destroyed. Before the man she married, Monique Richardson had a credit score of 740. She knew what that number meant. She had built it the way her mother had taught her to build anything. Slowly, deliberately. 1 payment at a time. 1 bill at a time. 1 year folded into the next until the number reflected something true about who she was. Reliable, disciplined, present. She worked as a bookkeeper at a small accounting firm on Market Street, 11 employees. She managed payroll accounts receivable quarterly filings. She understood money the way a mechanic understands an engine, not in theory, in practice. She knew how the parts connected. She knew what happened when one piece failed. She knew how to keep the whole thing running on schedule. Her credit score was not an abstraction to her. It was a record. A history written in numbers that said this woman pays what she owes on time without exception. 740. She had earned every point of it. She married at 24. The man she married was charming in the way that people are charming when they have decided that being liked is more efficient than being honest. He smiled easily. He remembered names. He held doors and paid for dinners and said the right thing at the right moment with the precision of someone who had studied what right things sounded like. He told her early in the marriage that he would handle the finances. She would handle the children, a division of labor. It sounded reasonable. It sounded like partnership. She did not know then that the most dangerous form of control does not look like control. It looks like convenience. He intercepted the mail. Not dramatically. He simply got to the mailbox first. Every day. He set up automatic payments on accounts she did not open. He told her the bills were handled. He told her the savings were growing. He told her not to worry about it, because worrying was his job now. She had 2 children in 3 years, Deshawn first, Keisha 18 months later. The children consumed her days. the finances became something that happened on the other side of a wall she could not see over. She trusted the wall. She trusted the man who stood behind it and told her everything was fine. He opened 4 credit cards in her name. She did not know. He used her social security number on each application. He signed her name on documents she never saw. He ran up $47,000 in debt across those 4 cards in 28 months. Store cards, cash advances, online purchases she would not discover for another 2 years. He spent methodically, not recklessly. He spread the charges across the accounts so that no single statement would trigger an alert. He had studied the system the same way Monique had studied it. But he used it differently. She had used it to build. He used it to take. Financial abuse occurs in nearly every case of domestic violence. It is the form of control that leaves no bruises, no broken doors, no police reports. It operates in silence, inside the ordinary architecture of a shared life, inside the mailbox and the bank account and the stack of documents that one person manages and the other person trusts them to manage. By the time the victim discovers what has happened, the damage is already embedded in a system that does not distinguish between the person who incurred the debt and the person whose name is on it. He left on a Wednesday. He did not leave a note. He did not take the children. He took his clothes, his laptop, and a car that was in both their names, but that he had been making payments on with her credit card. 2 weeks later, the letters started arriving. Collection notices, past due warnings, final demands, 4 accounts, $47,000, all of them in her name, all of them delinquent, all of them reporting to the 3 credit bureaus simultaneously. Her score dropped from 740 to 480 in 60 days. She filed a fraud dispute with each bureau. She filled out the forms. She provided what documentation she had, but the system required proof that she had not signed the applications. The signatures were in her name. The addresses matched. The accounts had been active for over 2 years. The system did not ask whether she knew about them. The system asked whether the information on the applications was accurate. And it was. Her name, her address, her social security number, all accurate, all placed there by someone who had access to every document in her life because she had married him and trusted him and let him handle the finances. She lost her job 4 months after he left. The accounting firm ran a routine credit check during annual reviews. It was standard practice. Companies that handled other people's money needed employees whose financial records were clean. Her record was not clean. Her employer did not ask for an explanation. The number spoke for itself. She lost the apartment 3 months after that. The landlord required a credit check for lease renewal. She did not pass. She moved to a smaller unit on Divisadero Street with 2 children under 4 and a credit score that had become a locked door she could not open from the inside. She filed an identity theft report with the police. She filed a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission. She disputed each account individually through each bureau's process. The process was slow. It required documentation she did not always have. It required patience that could not be eaten or worn or used to pay for a dental extraction. It required a lawyer she could not afford. 3 years. 3 years of letters and phone calls and disputes and forms and waiting. Her score moved from 480 to 503. 23 points. 3 years for 23 points. The accounts were still listed. The disputes were still pending. The man who opened them was living in another city with a new job and a clean record, and no legal consequence because Monique did not have the resources to pursue one. She had spent 3 years trying to prove to a system that she was not the person her credit report said she was. The system was not interested in who she was. It was interested in the number. Odessa Richardson worked as a nursing aide at a long-term care facility on Potrero Hill for 28 years. She did not miss a shift. Not when she had the flu, not when her back went out, not when the facility changed ownership twice and cut staff and increased patient loads and expected the remaining aides to absorb the difference without complaint. She absorbed it. She did not complain. She was paid every 2 weeks. On payday, she came home and sat at the kitchen table with her paycheck and 5 envelopes, each one labeled in her handwriting: rent, electric, food, bus, emergency. She divided the money by hand. The same amounts in the same order every 2 weeks for 28 years. She did not use a bank for the envelopes. She used the kitchen table and a pen, and the certainty that if you could see the money, you could control the money, and if you could control the money, you did not need anyone. She taught Monique the system when Monique was 12. She sat her down at the same kitchen table and handed her the envelopes and showed her how to divide, how to account, how to make less look like enough. She said one thing more often than anything else: you don't ask, you find a way. She did not say it with pride. She said it with the flatness of someone who had learned it through experience and who did not enjoy repeating the lesson. She had asked once. Monique did not know the full story. She knew only that her mother had asked someone for something important when she was young, and that the answer had been no, and that the no had taken something from her that she never described and never recovered, whatever it was. It had convinced Odessa that asking was a transaction with a cost that exceeded whatever you received in return. So she found ways. She worked double shifts when the car needed a repair. She sold blood plasma when the electric bill was higher than expected. She wore the same 3 uniforms for 9 years and washed them by hand every night and hung them over the shower rod to dry because the laundromat was $2.50 a load, and that was $2.50 that belonged in an envelope. She died at 56. Heart attack, at home, on a Sunday morning in March, alone. Monique found her that afternoon. She was sitting in the chair by the kitchen table. The envelopes were in front of her. She had been dividing. The pen was still in her hand. Monique kept the manila envelope, the one Odessa used for the important documents: birth certificate, social security card, lease agreement, the papers that proved you existed in a system that only recognized you by what you could show it. Monique began using the same envelope. She put her own documents inside it: her children's birth certificates, her divorce decree, her credit report, her mother's death certificate. The envelope that had once held Odessa's proof of life now held Monique's proof of everything that had gone wrong with hers. Going to the bank that morning was the first time in her life Monique Richardson asked anyone for anything. She heard her mother's voice the entire walk from the bus stop to the front door: you don't ask, you find a way. She went inside anyway. Deshawn placed his shoes by the front door every night, side by side, toes pointing out. He had been doing it since he was 5. Nobody taught him, nobody asked him to. He simply decided one evening that the shoes belonged there, and that placing them correctly was something he could control in a home where most things were not controllable. He poured his own milk. He made his own bed. He zipped his own jacket, and tied his own shoes, and packed his own backpack with the homework folder on the left side, and the pencil case on the right side, and the library book in the middle spine facing up, so the pages would not bend. He was 7 years old. He operated with the quiet efficiency of someone who had decided that the less he required, the less his mother would have to carry. He drew houses, on notebook paper at school, on the back of grocery receipts at home, on the inside cover of every library book he borrowed lightly in pencil so he could erase it before returning the book. Always the same house, 2 stories, a front porch with a railing, a tree in the yard, 4 windows on the 2nd floor, a door with a small overhang to keep the rain off. He had never lived in a house like that. He had lived in 3 apartments in 3 years. None of them had a porch. None of them had a yard. None of them had 4 windows on the 2nd floor, or a tree, or a door with an overhang, but he drew it every time. The same house, the same proportions, as if he were keeping a record of something he had not experienced yet but intended to. His teacher at Rosa Parks Elementary noticed the drawings. She mentioned them during a parent conference. She said Deshawn was a focused child, quiet, conscientious. She said the houses were always architecturally consistent, the same angles, the same scale. She said it as a compliment, Monique received it as information about her son that she already knew but had never heard spoken out loud by someone who was not her. Keisha was 4. She was not quiet. She asked questions the way weather happens, constantly, without warning, without regard for whether the answer was something anyone was prepared to give. Mama, why do we sleep in the same bed? Because the bed is big enough for both of you. Mama, why don't we have a car? Because the bus goes everywhere we need to go. Mama, why does Deshawn's face hurt? Because he fell at school and bumped his tooth. The doctor is going to fix it. When? Soon, baby. Monique answered every question with the truth. Not the whole truth, the version of it that a 4-year-old could hold without it becoming too heavy. She had learned to calibrate, to give just enough so the child felt heard without giving so much that the child felt afraid. Every night she read them the same book, the book her mother had read to her. A children's story about a woman who planted a garden on a rooftop because there was no yard. The pages were soft from years of handling. The spine had been broken and rebroken until it opened flat without resistance. Some of the illustrations had faded. The colors had gone pale at the edges the way things go pale when they have been touched too many times by hands that love them. She read in the voice her mother used, low, even, without performance. The voice of someone who has said these words enough times that they have become something closer to music than language. Deshawn listened with his eyes closed. Keisha listened with her eyes open, watching her mother's face the way Tobias watched Mabel's face in the construction site. Not for the story, for the presence. She did not know that Deshawn had heard her crying in the bathroom 3 nights ago. She did not know he had put his hand on the door and stood there for 11 minutes without knocking. She did not know he had gone back to bed and pulled the blanket over his sister and lain there in the dark with his hand still feeling the vibration of his mother's voice through the wood of a door he had decided not to open. He had decided not to open it because he understood at 7 something that most adults spend their lives trying to learn. That sometimes the most useful thing you can do for someone who is carrying too much is to let them put it down without an audience. Eric Johnson woke up at 5:45 on the morning of the bank appointment. He did not need an alarm either. His body had been calibrated to this schedule for 22 years. 5:45. 6 days a week. Regardless of season. Regardless of whether there was anything to wake up for. The penthouse occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse on Townsend Street. 2,200 square feet. Open floor plan. Floor-to-ceiling windows facing the bay. The kitchen had a coffee maker with a timer that started brewing at 5:30, so that by the time he reached the counter, the coffee was already poured. He had programmed it once, 6 years ago, when there was still someone in the apartment who drank the second cup. He stood at the counter and drank his coffee and looked at the bay through the window. The view had cost him $1.9 million. He did not think about that. He had stopped thinking about what things cost a long time ago. Cost was a variable that no longer constrained his decisions. It simply existed, like weather, like traffic. His closet held 31 dress shirts. He had not counted them. His assistant had. They were organized by color and fabric weight. He selected one without deliberation. Charcoal suit, no tie. He dressed the way he built. Clean lines. No ornamentation. Nothing that could be interpreted as trying. The dining table in the living area seated 6. It was Italian, walnut. He had bought it when his daughter was 13, and the family was still a unit that sat in chairs and passed things to each other and spoke about the day. The chairs were pushed in neatly. All 6 of them. 5 of them had not been pulled out in over a year. His daughter Brianna was 19. She attended Howard University. She called every other Sunday, sometimes. The conversations lasted between 7 and 12 minutes. She asked about work. He asked about classes. Neither of them asked the questions they meant to ask because they had both learned that the distance between San Francisco and Washington was not geographical. It was architectural, built over 6 years of a divorce that had been civil on paper and corrosive in practice. He had been married for 14 years. His ex-wife had left not because of cruelty or infidelity, but because of absence. He had been present in the building, but not in the rooms. Present in the schedule, but not in the moments between appointments. She told him once near the end that living with him was like living in a model home. Everything perfect, nothing lived in. He did not argue with that. He did not know how to argue with something that was accurate. Eric Johnson had built Johnson Development Group from a single duplex renovation in Bayview 22 years ago into a company that managed 14 active projects across 3 Bay Area counties, mid-size. Deliberate. He did not build luxury towers. He built mixed-use developments, residential above retail, workforce housing, the kind of buildings that a city needed, but that did not make headlines. He ran his company the way he ran his household. Everything measured, everything scheduled, every variable identified and accounted for before ground was broken. He did not gamble. He did not speculate. He built what the numbers said could be built, and he delivered it on time and on budget. He had built his life the way he built his buildings. Everything measured, nothing left to chance. The bank appointment was at 9:15. He arrived at 9:08. Whitfield was waiting in the lobby. The paperwork was already printed. The coffee was already poured. The $2.3 million construction credit line had been approved in committee the previous week. Today was signatures. 12 minutes. Handshake. Done. He sat in the cubicle with Whitfield and reviewed the disbursement schedule and the interest terms and the construction milestones tied to each draw. He initialed each page with a pen that cost more than Monique's monthly rent. He did not think about that. He did not think about monthly rent at all. Rent was something that happened to other people in a part of the economy he had passed through 20 years ago and had not looked back at since. He lived in a building with a doorman, and a view of the bay, and a coffee maker that poured for 2, and a dining table that seated 6, and silence that filled 2,200 square feet every night from the moment he walked in until the moment he left in the morning. Eric Johnson had $14 million in liquid assets and a dining table with 6 chairs and no one to sit in them. Monique Richardson had $43 in her checking account and 2 children who reached for her every night. One of them had everything the other needed. Neither of them knew it yet. Beverly Johnson worked housekeeping at the Fairmont Hotel on Nob Hill for 9 years. She cleaned 14 rooms a day. She carried her supplies in a cart that weighed more than her son did at the time, and she pushed it down carpeted hallways that smelled like lavender and money, and she made beds that cost more per night than she earned in a week. She never complained about the work. She complained about nothing. Complaining was a luxury that required an audience willing to listen, and Beverly had determined early that no such audience existed for women who pushed carts down hotel hallways. In 1993, Eric was 10 years old. He needed a school uniform. The school had changed its dress code that September. Khaki pants, white polo shirt, black shoes. The notice came home on a Friday. The uniform was required by the following Monday. The cost was $200. Beverly did not have $200. She had $87. Payday was 12 days away. She went to her supervisor on a Monday morning. She asked for a paycheck advance, $200. She would work it off within the pay period. She had not missed a shift in 4 years. She presented it the way a person presents something when they have already calculated the cost of asking and decided the need outweighs it. The supervisor said no. Company policy, no advances. He said it looking at his clipboard. Not at her. Beverly went home. She found the $200. She borrowed $40 from a neighbor. She returned bottles and cans for $11. She sold a coat she needed to a woman down the hall for $20. She found a way. Eric wore the uniform on Monday. 2 weeks later, Beverly was let go. Restructuring. That was the word they used. They restructured her position out of existence on a Wednesday afternoon, and she walked out of the service entrance with 9 years of work behind her and nothing in front of her and a cart that someone else would push down those hallways. Starting tomorrow. Eric was 10. He understood more than she knew. He understood that his mother had asked for something and that 2 weeks later she no longer had a job, and that the connection between those two events was not coincidental. Asking had made her visible. Visible in the wrong way. Visible as someone who needed, and needing in a building where the rooms cost $400 a night was an inconvenience the building could restructure away. Beverly did not tell Eric she had been fired. She put on her uniform every morning for 3 weeks. She left the apartment at 6:45. She came home at 4:30. She spent the hours between looking for work, walking into hotels and restaurants and office buildings and asking if they needed someone, not asking for anything else, just asking if they needed someone. Eric found the uniform in the trash on the 4th week, folded neatly inside a plastic bag at the bottom of the bin, not thrown away carelessly, placed there, the way you place something when you have decided it is finished and you want to give it a proper ending even if no one is watching. He did not say anything. He was 10. He did not know the words for what he understood. He just understood that his mother had been wearing a costume for 3 weeks, and that the costume had been the only thing between him and the truth, and that she had carried it as long as she could. Beverly found work cleaning private homes. The pay was less. The hours were longer. The work was the same. She never asked anyone for anything again. Not a raise, not a day off, not help with the groceries or the electric bill or the pain in her lower back that started at 42 and never stopped. She found a way. She always found a way. That was the phrase she used the way other people used prayer. Not with faith, with discipline. She died at 53. Heart attack. She had been having chest pains for 2 months. She had not gone to a doctor. She had not told Eric. She had not told anyone. She had found a way to manage it. Until the morning her body decided there was no way left to manage it, and she collapsed in the kitchen of a house she was cleaning in Pacific Heights, 4 blocks from the bank, where her son would sit 31 years later in a cubicle signing papers for $2.3 million. Eric was 26 when she died. He had already started his company. He had already made his first $1 million. He could have paid for the doctor. He could have paid for the hospital. He could have paid for everything. But she had not told him she was in pain because telling him would have been asking, and Beverly Johnson did not ask. She found a way, until there was no way left to find. Eric built his company so he would never need to ask anyone for anything. What he had not understood until he heard Monique Richardson's voice through 3 inches of pressboard was that his mother had not taught him independence. She had taught him fear. And he had mistaken the fear for strength for 31 years. Eric sat in his car in the bank parking lot with the engine off and the loan documents on the passenger seat and his hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. He did not start the car. The documents sat in a leather folder. $2.3 million. Approved. Signed. Disbursement scheduled. The folder looked like what it was. Evidence of a life that had been built correctly. Every number in the right column. Every risk accounted for. Every variable controlled. He was not looking at the folder. He was replaying what he had heard through the partition, not the words. The sequence. The credit score read aloud by a woman who was looking at a screen. The silence that followed. The explanation that came next. Steady. Practiced. The voice of someone who had rehearsed the asking, until the asking sounded like something other than what it was. Then the answer. The system does not allow me to approve this. Then the silence again. Longer this time. The silence of someone receiving information they had prepared for but hoped would not arrive. Then the chair. The sound of a chair being pushed back on low carpet. The sound of standing up. Then 2 words. Thank you. She thanked them. That was the part that stayed. She had sat in that cubicle and asked for $500 and been told no by a system that did not know her name, and she had said thank you and picked up her envelope and walked out. She had thanked them for telling her no. Eric sat in the car for 23 minutes. He knew because the dashboard clock read 9:41 when he stopped moving and 10:04 when he started the engine. 23 minutes of looking at the leather folder on the passenger seat and seeing it for the first time, not as achievement, but as evidence. Evidence of the distance between 2 cubicles in the same building on the same morning. 3 inches of pressboard. $3 million on one side, $500 denied on the other. He started the engine. He did not drive home. He did not drive to the construction site on Fillmore. He pulled out of the parking lot and turned south. He drove toward the Western Addition. Eric returned to the bank at 4:37 that afternoon. The lobby was half empty. The tellers were processing end-of-day transactions. The light had shifted from the morning fluorescence into something flatter. He did not go to the front desk. He walked directly to the commercial lending office and found Whitfield at his desk finishing paperwork. Whitfield looked up, smiled, the trained smile. "Mr. Johnson, is there something else you need on the credit line?" Eric sat down. He did not return the smile. "The woman in the cubicle next to mine this morning, the one who was denied, is that common?" Whitfield paused. He closed the folder he had been working on. He looked at Eric, the way a banker looks at a client who has just asked a question that falls outside the normal parameters of their relationship. "I cannot discuss another client's application, Mr. Johnson. I am not asking about her application. I am asking about the pattern. A loan under $1,000. What is the denial rate?" Whitfield considered the question. He pulled up a screen. 68%. For applications under $1,000 in this branch, 68% denied. Eric looked at the number on the screen. He had spent 22 years in real estate development. He understood lending. He understood risk assessment. He understood the mathematics of approval and denial, but he had never once looked at the mathematics from the other side of the partition. "The processing cost," Whitfield said. "For a loan under $1,000, the administrative overhead exceeds the potential revenue. The system is designed for efficiency. Small dollar loans are not efficient." Eric understood what Whitfield was saying. The system was not broken. The system was working exactly as intended. It was intended to serve transactions that justified the cost of processing them. $500 did not justify the cost. The woman sitting 3 inches away from him that morning had not been rejected by a person. She had been rejected by arithmetic. He drove through the Western Addition that evening. Streets he had driven through before. Streets his mother had walked. The neighborhood where Beverly Johnson had cleaned houses for 7 years after the hotel let her go. He had not been back since she died. He stopped at the bus stop where he had seen Monique standing that morning. She was not there. The bench was empty. The schedule board was bolted to the pole. Route 22, 14 stops. 47 minutes from the Western Addition to the financial district. 47 minutes each way. An hour and 34 minutes of travel to sit in a cubicle for 11 minutes and be told that $500 was too much risk for a woman whose entire life was organized inside a manila envelope. He looked at the bus schedule and understood something he had not understood that morning. He understood it now because he was standing where his mother had stood. On bus stops like this one, waiting for rides to jobs that paid less than she was worth. Finding ways he would find her. Not that day, not the way he expected. Monique knocked on apartment 4B and held the blazer out on its hanger. Gwendolyn opened the door. She looked at the blazer. She looked at Monique. Some questions are answered by the way a person hangs a jacket on a hook. Gwendolyn took the blazer and hung it inside her closet without a word. She did not ask how it went. She did not need to. The blazer came back the same way it left. Clean. Pressed. Buttoned. But the woman returning it was not the same woman who had borrowed it. Something had been subtracted from her posture. Not hope exactly. The energy it takes to hold hope in place. Monique walked back across the hall. The apartment smelled like rice and the last of the chicken broth she had stretched across 2 days. Deshaun was at the kitchen table. His homework was open in front of him. He was writing with his right hand and holding his left cheek with the other. He did not look up when she came in. He had learned not to look up with questions in his face, because questions required answers, and answers sometimes cost his mother something he could not see but could feel. Keisha was on the floor with a library book open in front of her. She was not reading it. She was turning pages and looking at the pictures and narrating the story to herself in a voice that was half whisper and half invention. She looked up. "Did you go to the place, Mama?" "Yes, baby." Did they help? Not yet. 2 words. Not yet. Not no. Monique had chosen those words carefully. Not yet left a door open. Not yet meant there was still a next step. Not yet was the version of the truth that a 4-year-old could carry without it becoming too heavy. Keisha accepted it the way she accepted most of her mother's answers, completely, without suspicion. She went back to narrating her book. At 8:30, Monique sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed clove oil on Deshawn's gums. Night 14. Her fingers knew the geography of his mouth now, the swollen ridge along the upper left, the soft tissue that flinched when she pressed too close to the cracked tooth. She had learned to apply pressure with the pad of her ring finger, gentle enough not to cause pain, firm enough for the oil to reach the nerve. Her hands were steady. Almost. There was a tremor she could control during the day when there were tasks to focus on and children to feed and a bus to catch. At night, the tremor surfaced. A vibration in her fingertips that she managed by pressing them flat against surfaces, against the countertop, against the edge of the bathtub, against the face of her son who trusted her hands more than he trusted anything else in the world. Deshawn closed his eyes. The oil took hold. 40 minutes. She had 40 minutes before the pain would return, and he would shift in his sleep and grind his teeth unconsciously and wake up at 3 in the morning with his hand against his cheek. She read them the book, the one with the rooftop garden. Keisha fell asleep on page 6. Deshawn lasted until page 11. He always lasted longer, not because he was less tired, because he was making sure she was still there. After they were asleep, Monique walked to the kitchen table. She sat down. She opened the manila envelope. She laid the documents out one at a time. The credit report, 503 in the upper right corner, the number that had spoken for her that morning in a language she had not written. The divorce decree, the birth certificates, Deshawn's, Keisha's, her mother's death certificate, Odessa Richardson. Date of death, March 14th. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. Every document was a chapter. Every chapter fit inside a single envelope. She looked at the chapters of her life arranged on a kitchen table at 9:45 at night, and she did what she had always done. She calculated. What could she sell? Nothing. The furniture was rented. The television was Gwendolyn's old one. The phone was prepaid. She owned nothing with resale value. Who could she borrow from? No one. Gwendolyn lived on Social Security. Her co-workers at the motel lived the same paycheck cycle she did. There was no margin anywhere. Payday loan. She knew the math. She was a bookkeeper. She knew that a 400% annual interest rate on $500 meant she would owe $627 in 60 days, and that $627 was further from possible than $500 had been. The trap was not hidden. It was advertised. It was designed for people exactly like her, people who needed $500 at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night and had nowhere else to go. She opened the laptop she had borrowed from the public library's lending program. She searched for free dental clinics in San Francisco. 4 results. 1 had closed. 1 had a 6-month waiting list. 2 were open. She wrote down the phone numbers on the back of an envelope. She would call at 7 in the morning. She would call both of them. She would explain the situation. She would ask. She closed the envelope. She placed it inside the drawer next to her mother's book. She lay down on the sofa. She did not sleep. She lay there and calculated every option she had left. By 3 in the morning she had found 2 she had not tried. That was enough. That had always been enough. That night, Eric Johnson did something he had never done in 22 years of working with banks. He sat at his kitchen counter with his laptop open and typed 5 words into the search bar. Why banks reject small loans. He had built 14 developments. He had signed loan documents totaling over $90 million across his career. He had sat in boardrooms with lending committees and discussed risk profiles and debt service coverage ratios and capital reserves. He understood banking the way a surgeon understands anatomy, from the inside, with precision. He had never once looked at it from the outside. The first result was a Federal Reserve study. 40% of Americans cannot cover an unexpected expense of $400. Not 4,000, 400. He read that number twice. He lived in a city where a parking ticket cost more than that, where a dinner for two cost more than that, where the coffee machine in his kitchen cost 6 times that. The second result explained why banks deny small loans. The cost of processing a loan application at a commercial bank runs between $200 and $300 regardless of the loan amount. For a $2.3 million construction credit line, that processing cost is negligible. For a $500 personal loan, it exceeds the total interest the bank would earn over the life of the loan. The math does not work. The system is not designed to serve amounts that small. It is designed to serve amounts that justify the infrastructure. He read about what happens next. When banks say no, the people they say no to do not stop needing the money. They go to payday lenders. The average annual interest rate on a payday loan is 391%. A $500 payday loan costs $675 to repay over 90 days. The borrower who could not afford $500 now owes $675. The cycle begins. It does not end. He read about credit scores. How the scoring model penalizes thin credit files. How having too little credit history lowers your score. How the system punishes you for not borrowing and also punishes you when you borrow under distress. How a score is not a measure of character or discipline or reliability. It is a measure of how profitably you have participated in the lending system. If you have never participated because you were never invited, the system assigns you a number that ensures you never will be. Eric looked at the screen. He had never once thought about what happened to the people the system said no to. He had only ever been the person it said yes to. He thought about that morning. $2.3 million approved in 12 minutes. $500 denied in 11. The same building, the same morning, the same system, 2 different answers. Eric walked into Pacific Republic Bank at 8:45 the next morning, not to the commercial lending office, to the branch manager's office on the 2nd floor. The branch manager's name was Calloway. Eric had known him for 6 years. They had closed 4 construction loans together. Calloway stood up when Eric walked in, offered coffee, offered a chair. The choreography of a relationship built on large numbers. Eric did not sit down. Does this bank have a program for small-dollar emergency loans, under $1,000, for people who get denied through the standard process? Calloway looked at him. He tilted his head slightly. The way a person tilts their head when someone asks a question that does not belong in the room they are standing in. We do not, Mr. Johnson. The margins do not support it. It is not profitable. Eric looked at him for a moment. Then he said 5 words. Make it profitable. I will guarantee it. He laid it out. He would deposit $25,000 into a guarantee account. Any applicant denied a loan under $1,000 at this branch would be automatically reconsidered through the guarantee fund. 0 interest. 12 months to repay. If the borrower defaulted, the loss came from Eric's deposit, not the bank's balance sheet. The bank processed the paperwork. Eric absorbed the risk. Calloway listened. He asked questions. He pulled up compliance guidelines. He said he would need to run it through legal. Eric told him to run it through legal today. He did not leave the bank after that. He went downstairs. He found Whitfield. The woman from yesterday. The one in the next cubicle. I am not asking for her personal information. I am asking what bus line serves the area where most of your denied applicants live. Whitfield paused. Route 22, he said. The Western Addition, predominantly. Eric drove to the Western Addition. He had been there the day before. He had stood at the bus stop and looked at the schedule. Today he drove further, down Fillmore, down Divisadero, past the buildings his mother had cleaned, past the corner where she had waited for buses that took 47 minutes to reach hotels that paid her $11 an hour. He found Monique at the community health clinic on Golden Gate Avenue, not because anyone told him where she was, because there were only 4 free clinics in the Western Addition, and 2 of them were closed, and one had a 6-month wait list, and the 4th opened at 9, and had a line that formed at 6. He parked across the street at 7:15. The line was already 40 people long. It stretched from the clinic entrance down the sidewalk and around the corner of the building. He saw a woman with 2 children in a stroller. He saw an elderly man in a wheelchair with a plastic bag of medication on his lap. He saw a teenager with a bandaged hand sitting on the curb reading a textbook. He saw Monique. Third from the front, she had arrived early. Deshaun was beside her, his left hand in hers, his right hand holding a juice box, his cheek still swollen. He was not complaining. He was standing quietly beside his mother in a line of 40 people at 7:15 in the morning outside a clinic that would open in an hour and 45 minutes. Eric did not cross the street. He did not approach her. He stood beside his car and looked at the boy holding his mother's hand, and he saw himself, 10 years old, standing outside the hotel manager's office, holding his mother's hand, waiting for an answer that would determine whether the next month was manageable or impossible. He got back in the car. He drove to his office. He picked up the phone and called his attorney. "I need you to look into something for me. It is not business. It is a correction." The attorney's name was Paulette Chambers. She had handled Eric's corporate legal work for 8 years. Real estate contracts, partnership agreements, zoning disputes. She was methodical and thorough, and she did not ask unnecessary questions. This time she asked one. A correction of what? Eric told her what he knew. A woman denied a $500 loan, a credit score of 503. 2 part-time jobs, 2 children, one of them with an infected tooth. He told Paulette he wanted to understand how a person ends up with a credit score of 503. Paulette called him back in 4 days. The credit report showed 4 credit card accounts opened within a 28-month window. All 4 carried balances. Total outstanding debt across the 4 accounts at the time of default was $47,000. The accounts had been delinquent for over 2 years before being sent to collections. There was also a personal loan for $12,000. Same name, same social security number, same address. All 5 accounts had been opened by the same applicant, except the applicant had not opened them. The signature analysis showed consistent penmanship across all 5 applications. The handwriting matched the name on the accounts, but the handwriting did not match the signature on the woman's driver's license renewal. It did not match the signature on her divorce filing. It did not match the signature on her children's school enrollment forms. Someone had signed her name on 5 credit applications. Someone who knew her social security number. Someone who had access to her personal documents. Someone who had lived in the same house and slept in the same bed, and told her he would handle the finances while she handled the children. Financial abuse is present in 99% of domestic violence cases. It is the form of abuse that does not leave marks on the body. It leaves marks on a credit report. It operates through mailboxes and bank statements and applications filed in someone else's name. It does not require force. It requires access, and access is what marriage provides. The man who had done this was not hiding. He was living in Portland. He had a new job, a new apartment, a new phone number. He had left San Francisco 3 years ago and had not faced a single legal consequence because filing a criminal complaint for identity theft requires a police report, and a police report requires evidence, and evidence requires a lawyer, and a lawyer requires money that the victim does not have because the perpetrator has already taken it. Monique had been paying his debt for 3 years, $19,000, from 2 part-time jobs, $19,000 that should have gone to food and rent and school supplies and the dental care her son needed. She had been making minimum payments on accounts she did not open with money she did not have for debts she did not incur. Eric sat in his office and listened to Paulette read the findings. His hands were on the desk. His jaw was set. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The facts were loud enough. "She has been paying his debt for 3 years," he said, "with money she does not have, for food her kids need." Paulette waited. She had worked with Eric long enough to know when he was processing and when he was deciding. This was deciding. File the identity theft report. Contact all 3 credit bureaus. Freeze the fraudulent accounts. Start the dispute process on every one of them. And find me a family law attorney who handles financial abuse cases pro bono or reduced fee. Paulette wrote it down. She did not ask why. She had heard the answer in his voice. Eric hung up. The system had not failed Monique Richardson. The system had worked exactly as designed. It had processed her number and produced an answer. The system had simply never been designed to ask where the number came from. The clinic doctor told Monique that the antibiotics had bought time but not a solution. The infection was advancing. 5 days. If the tooth was not extracted within 5 days, the infection would reach a point where an emergency room visit would no longer be optional. It would be mandatory. And the cost of that visit would not be $500. It would be thousands. Monique walked out of the clinic holding Deshawn's hand and carrying the same manila envelope she had carried into the bank 2 days ago. The same documents inside, the same woman holding it. Except now, she had 5 days instead of an open timeline, and the distance between those two things was the distance between difficult and desperate. Eric was standing on the sidewalk across from the clinic entrance. He had not planned what he was going to say. He had spent 2 days planning everything else. The guarantee fund, the attorney, the credit bureau contacts. He had built the infrastructure the way he built buildings, methodically from the foundation up. But he had not planned the words, because the words were the part that required something he had spent 31 years avoiding. Walking up to a stranger and offering something that might be refused. He crossed the street. Monique saw him before he reached her. She did not recognize him. She had never seen his face. She had been in a cubicle with a partition between them. She knew his voice existed on the other side of that wall, but she did not know what it looked like. He stopped 3 feet in front of her. Deshawn looked up at him with the expression children have when a stranger approaches their mother. Not fear. Assessment. My name is Eric Johnson. I was at Pacific Republic Bank the same morning you were. I was in the cubicle next to yours. I heard everything. Monique did not move. She did not step back. She did not look away. She looked at him the way a person looks at someone who has just told them something they need a moment to process. Not because it was complicated, because it was unexpected. Then you heard me get told no. She said it without shame, without apology, without the performance of dignity that people sometimes put on when they have been seen at their most vulnerable. She said it as fact, the way you say the temperature or the time. Eric looked at her. Yes, he said. I heard them say no. I also heard you say, thank you, after they said it. Silence. The kind of silence that holds its shape on a sidewalk outside a clinic where 40 people are still waiting in line. That is the part that stayed, he said. Monique looked at Deshawn. She adjusted her grip on his hand. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said what she had to say. I do not take money from people I do not know. Eric nodded. I am not offering money. I am offering what I should have done when I was sitting 3 inches away from you and did nothing. He paused. Not as charity, as a correction. He told her about the guarantee fund. He told her about the attorney. He told her that the credit accounts in her name showed signs of fraud and that his legal team could file the disputes and the identity theft report on her behalf. He told her that the $500 for Deshawn's extraction could be processed as a loan through the fund. 0 interest, 12 months, her name on the paperwork, her payments building the credit history that had been stolen from her. He was not rescuing her. He was removing an obstacle that should never have been in her path. Monique listened. She held the manila envelope against her side the way she always held it, with both hands, with care. She looked at Deshawn, his left cheek, his hand in hers. She looked at Eric. My mother used to say, you don't ask, you find a way. She said it flat, without sentiment. The way you repeat something you have heard 1,000 times and are hearing differently for the first time. I went to that bank and asked for the first time in my life. She paused. I am done being afraid of asking. She did not say yes. She did not say thank you. She said something that was harder than both of those things. She said she was done with the rule that had kept her mother silent and kept her small and kept her standing on sidewalks with envelopes full of proof that the world had been wrong about her. She agreed, not because she needed to be saved, because she chose to stop carrying a weight that was never hers to carry. Deshawn had the extraction 3 days later. The procedure took 22 minutes. The oral surgeon numbed the area and removed the cracked premolar and cleaned the infection from the bone and packed the socket with gauze and told Monique to bring him back in 1 week for a follow-up. The $500 was processed through the guarantee fund at Pacific Republic Bank. Monique signed the loan documents at the same desk where she had been denied 5 days earlier. The same cubicle, the same chair, the same loan officer. The loan officer looked at her. For the first time she looked at her. Not at the screen, not at the credit score, at the woman sitting across from her, who had said thank you after being told no and who had come back anyway. Deshawn ate dinner that night with his mouth closed. He chewed on both sides. He did not tilt his head. He did not hold his cheek. He ate rice and chicken and green beans, and he asked for seconds, and Monique gave them to him and watched him eat the way a person watches something they were not sure they would see again. The attorney filed the identity theft report within the week. The 4 fraudulent credit card accounts were flagged and frozen within 30 days. The dispute process moved through the 3 credit bureaus over the following months. One by one, the accounts were removed. The personal loan was challenged and reversed. The debt that had been assigned to Monique's name by a man who had signed her signature on documents she never saw was documented and traced and ultimately eliminated from her record. Her credit score moved from 503 to 680 in 5 months, 23 points in 3 years, 177 points in 5 months. The difference was not effort. She had always had the effort. The difference was access. Access to a lawyer. Access to someone who knew how the system worked from the side that said yes. She applied for a bookkeeper position at an accounting firm in the financial district. The firm ran a background check. She passed. She started on a Monday. The same work she had done before the marriage. The same skills. The same precision with numbers. The same woman. Rebuilt. Not into something new. Into what she had been before someone dismantled it. Eric expanded the guarantee fund. 25,000 became 50,000. The bank formalized the program. 50 applicants were approved in the first 6 months. Each one had been denied through the standard process. Each one needed less than $1,000. Each one had a version of $500 standing between them and the next morning. Deshawn still drew houses. The same 2-story house with the porch and the tree and the 4 windows on the 2nd floor. But now there were people standing in front of it. 3 of them, a woman, a small girl, and a boy. The boy was smiling, on both sides. Monique paid off the $500 loan in 4 months. She walked into the bank on a Tuesday afternoon and made the final payment. She brought the manila envelope. She opened it and placed the payoff receipt inside, next to her mother's death certificate, next to her children's birth certificates, next to the divorce decree and the credit report that now read 680 instead of 503. Some envelopes hold everything you have lost. Some hold the proof that you found your way back. A woman walked into a bank and asked for $500. The system looked at a number on a screen and called her a risk. The man who created that number was living in another city with a clean record and a new life and no legal consequence. The system did not ask who destroyed her credit. It did not ask why the number was what it was. It asked the number, and the number answered, and the woman was told no. Think about who the system is designed to protect. Think about who it is designed to punish. Think about that for a long time. The cruelest thing about what happened to Monique Richardson is not what she survived. It is how invisible her survival was. She was in a bank, in a cubicle, 3 inches from a man who had everything she needed, and neither of them could see each other through the wall. There is someone near you right now sitting in a waiting room, standing in a line, holding an envelope full of paperwork that tells the story of everything that went wrong, and they are not asking for help. Not because they do not need it, because they learned the way Monique's mother learned, the way Eric's mother learned, that asking costs something that money cannot repay. If you are that person, the one holding the envelope, put it down. Ask. Asking is not weakness. Asking is the bravest thing Monique Richardson ever did. If this story changed the way you think about the person sitting next to you, send it to someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe now. The next story is waiting. I want to be transparent with you. This story is fictional. The characters are not real people, but the systems described in this story are real. Credit scoring, small dollar lending gaps, financial abuse in marriages. These are not inventions. Every statistic mentioned in this story is based on data from the Federal Reserve and the National Network to End Domestic Violence. 40% of Americans cannot cover an unexpected $400 expense. That is not fiction. 68% of small dollar loan applications are denied. That is not fiction. Financial abuse occurs in nearly every documented case of domestic violence. That is not fiction. I wrote this story because I believe that a narrative can make visible what a spreadsheet cannot. Numbers tell you the scale. Stories tell you the cost. If you or someone you know is experiencing financial abuse, the National Domestic Violence Hotline can help. The number is 1-800-799-7233. They are free. They are confidential. They are there. I am not a financial advisor. I am not a policymaker. I am a storyteller, but I believe the wall between those two cubicles was never 3 inches of pressboard. It was the distance between being seen and being invisible. And that distance can be closed by anyone, at any time, starting now.